I'm doing a series, The Ifs of Jesus, and last week I took the first because there's over 200 in the Gospels. The first one was in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, so just a couple of things to regroup from last week. What I did say last week was before about foreign languages. In Greek there's several words for if, believe it or not, and they have different kinds of connotations to them. I don't want to get into a huge thing about the word if. I think what is important to remember is that one of the words for if that Jesus uses quite a bit is kind of like, sowing and reaping. If you do this, then that's the result. The other one is used in a sense where you already know something. In fact, the word since would be better than if. Since you already decided to go to England, then something. It's a little bit different of the way the word's used. It doesn't really matter. Whatever if you use, there's always a connection to something that's unknown. So that's similar to the way we use the word if here. There's a connection to the unknown. So Jesus reveals things that we don't know. And in the revelation itself of telling us something that we don't know, like last week, you are the salt of the earth, is how he starts. He wouldn't be saying that to a massive group of people if they didn't consider themselves or think of themselves as the salt of the earth. And then he puts the if after it, if the salt loses its flavor. If is used in different ways. Last week we stressed that idea of revelation, that he tells us something that we don't know. But also, when he says, when you read that passage, and I hope we could all kind of develop a deeper and more thorough, prayerful way of reading the word. Because we assume, because he says if the salt loses its flavor, how is it going to regain its saltiness? It's good for nothing but to be thrown on the path and trampled underfoot by men. But he asks a question and doesn't wait for an answer, and there is an answer. If the salt loses its flavor, how is it going to get salted again? In other words, the question is about restoration. And it's a basic answer that just says, with man, it's impossible. We can't regain our saltiness, but what we can do is appeal to the mercy and grace of God to be restored. We ended the meeting with the prodigal. He basically left, he comes to himself, returns, and is restored. There is always restoration. Now, that might fly in the face of things that you may have thought over the years. You might have heard somebody say, oh, you've gone too far this time. I do not believe, and I can present it scripturally, that there is such a place as you've gone too far. When we cry out to God under any condition, our God answers. He longs to restore us. If we don't, then getting thrown on the path, which was a cultural thing in Jesus' day, the salt was just thrown on the path because it was good for nothing. There's a space in between there. There's an answer to that question. And when you know Jesus, you can just smile and say, I know the answer to that one. You're the restorer of my soul. I know that. I can be restored, can't I? So today we're moving to John 21, and it's the last chapter of the New Testament. There's an if in there. And just to quickly put you back in the picture, in John 21, it's the passage where Jesus has appeared to them twice now, according to John. Peter decides that he's going fishing, and all the boys go with him. They go out, they're fishing all night long, they don't catch anything. Jesus is on the shore, but they don't know it's Jesus. He asks them, hey, how you guys doing out there? How's the fishing? Got any food? Got any fish? No. He said, why don't you throw the net on the right side of the boat? They do. They catch the fish. That's that whole story. And then when they get to shore, Peter's the one who drags the net, 153 fish. Anyway, that's that whole story. They have breakfast with Jesus. John said it's the third time that he's appeared to them. And then Jesus isolates Peter. He isolates Peter and starts the series of, do you love me? And he's asking Peter, do you love me in an agape love, unconditional, self-sacrificial. And Peter's replying, you know I love you. And he's using a different word. He's using the word that you use with friends, phileo. So Jesus is asking him one question about a certain kind of love. Peter's responding with a different kind of love. And then Jesus is saying, okay, well then tend my sheep. I do wonder, to be honest with you, I wonder if Jesus' response was based on Peter's response. In other words, he's asking one thing, Peter's answering another, and it's like, well, based on that response, Peter, feed my sheep, do this, do that. It's sort of like that question of, will you marry me? It's not a question of what are you going to do for me. It's, will you spend your life with me, whatever that means. Yeah, I'll do the laundry, and I'll do the cooking, and I'll do all that. It's almost like that kind of an answer. And it's like, but that's not what I asked you. I asked for a loving relationship where we walk this thing out every day. It's kind of like a disconnect with Jesus and Peter, and Jesus is giving him these assignments about feeding and taking care of sheep. It's the third one. He picks up on Peter's response and says, okay, so do you phileo me? Is that what we're talking about here? And that's when Peter kind of gets upset. It doesn't say he knew what was going on. It's just like he says, Lord, you know all things. It's a very dramatic passage. A lot of people have a lot of things to say about it. For me, that's not the point, because we're going after an if. After the third, do you love me? And Peter's response is when Jesus gives him a prophetic word about his future. There's no if attached to Jesus telling you this is what your future looks like. There's no if attached to that. It is down the line, this is what's going to happen in your life, he tells Peter. John 21, verses 18 through 22.
Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me."
So there was an if in there. Yeah, there is. It's the last if in the Gospels. It's easy to miss what Jesus is saying there about spiritual maturity, how we grow spiritually. It's not really very vague at all, but it's easy to miss. When he says, when you were younger, you did what you want. When you mature and you're older, you're going to end up doing things and going places you don't want. I can't think of a better definition for spiritual maturity except going from the perks of being a Christian that we all enter into, all these wonderful, great things that I want in my life, to saying, you know what, this is what a disciplined Christian walk is about. I don't do what I want all the time. I do what he tells me, what he wants. He has expressed his will, and my will is being conformed to his. That's what a son and growing is about, is our wills becoming conformed to his. In fact, Jesus actually says to him, if I decide, if I want for this guy to remain alive until I return, what business is it of yours? Last week we talked about salt losing its flavor, as I said earlier. And that's a good example of spiritual immaturity, of having all the potential in the world and all the possibilities and all the opportunities before us, but we don't act on any of them. We act on what we want, what I want. My will be done. Thank God that we said we can be restored and we can get back on track. We don't have to be trampled underfoot. And it appears as though the way that we develop spiritually is not by regaining flavor, but by spreading it. There's a lot of opportunities that we have to share the love of Christ with a lot of people. This is not a guilt complex thing. It's just the truth that growing spiritually means seizing those opportunities that God presents us with. Anyway, Jesus says, if I will, in verse 22. And it's the same word that's used in verse 18 regarding Peter, that when you were younger, you did what you wanted, what you willed. Now, some could take this to mean just down the line, a way of Jesus saying, mind your own business. I mean, when you hear it, it sort of sounds like that, doesn't it? And I got to be honest with you, I don't have a problem, because there's enough hard things that Jesus says in the Gospels, depending on how you read them. And they could be kind of harsh sounding even. Luke 11, verses 44, 45, and 46.
Woe to you, scribes and the Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like graves which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them. Then one of the lawyers answered and said to him, Teacher, by saying these things you reproach us also. And he said, woe to you also, lawyers, for you load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers.
You gotta love that. Jesus addresses the Pharisees and the scribes there and addresses their hypocrisy. And a lawyer says, not for anything, but, if you insult them, you insult us too. Now, at that point, you'd think, now any of us might go, well, no, I wasn't really wanting to insult you. I was And he turns and he says, okay, woe to you lawyers as well. You want to get on with this thing? It's like the guy he might as well, he's picked the wrong day and the wrong time to be trying to, sort Jesus out kind of thing. That's kind of, if you put yourself in that situation, there is a level of insult that he's just, but it's true. What he's saying is true. The way they treated people and where they were at. The only thing I'm saying is, when you read those 4 Gospels, it's all over the place. There's a lot of times Jesus says some things that are like, I can't believe he just said that. Are you kidding me? But he said it, not because he hated anybody, it was just because it was true. And to us, it comes out sounding hard. Mm-hmm. To him, it's like, this is the softest I can get, to be honest with you. So, if he's saying to Peter, mind your own business, I don't particularly have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. When he says, what is that to you? Mm-hmm. But I also see it in a different way, because I'm not sure that that's actually what's happening. I think it's almost like I've just given you a revelation of your future. What is that to you? What are you going to do with it? What does it mean to you? How are you going to pray into that? Surely you should be asking me questions now about that. You should be asking me to prepare you for that, because I've just given you a truth. I've told you the way forward in your life, what's going to happen. My real concern is, are you going to feed, like I just said, and follow me? Like I said, that's really what this is about. I've given you a revelation. Are you going to act on the revelation? Or are you going to be turning your head and wondering what's going on in other people's lives? What are we really doing here? What are we talking about? You see, when I look at it, I see 2 things side by side. I see care. He's told Peter, I want you to care for my sheep, the way I've shown the care for everybody. And Peter is not showing much care for what Jesus just said to him. He's showing more care for his curiosity, to feed his little prophetic itch.